Good evening. Good evening. Oh, this is going to be a tough group. This is a really tough group. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to ask people to start to find their seats. I'm going to ask the board members for the chapter to help people find their seats. I think I'm going to need all the help I can get to help people find their seats. And more. So, I'd like to welcome all of you. Good evening. Long time no see. Yeah. Good evening. Start to settle into your seats, please. I want to welcome you all to the Association for Talent Development for tonight's program. I'm Ross Tartell. I'm president of the chapter, and it's great to see so many familiar faces and so many new ones. You'll find that with this chapter, we look to reach out to people because this is one of those chapters where professionally you reach back to pull people forward and we all advance together. It's a fabulous chapter, but that professionally we really work together to create a future for our profession and for the people we serve. So I want to thank all of you for coming this evening. I truly appreciate it. For those of you who don't know me, I am a tabletop dancing extrovert. So I will not get on the table because I don't want to embarrass people who know me. But I'm happy to see so many faces settling in and getting ready for this for this evening's program. A couple of things that we just need to talk about because in a meeting like this, there's always the safety issues. You have to know where the exits are. There's always that primary drive that is other than eating that you need to know about, and I think you found that place for the men and for the women separately as you came in. And I also want to talk about the culture we have here. I alluded to it before, but it's a culture of partnership and cooperation and relationship. And we have people here who are in transition. We have people who are internal to organizations. We have new students. We have people who are on the vendor side. And this is a relationship where you build the relationship, you build the connection, and then you can create that future. So as you work together, work to create the relationship first. And that's one of the magical things about this chapter, and one of the things that has separated this chapter from so many others that I've been associated with. So we have a couple of announcements. For those who are chapter members, this is the time of year when we're doing succession planning. So this year, we have a couple of people who will be going off the board. We have 4 members who are aspiring to join the board. The board gave approval to them tonight, but it's up to the chapter members to give final approval. So for those 4 new members, I'd like you to stop chewing for a second and be ready to stand up just so that people here see who you are. You don't need to do any introductions. They will see it because we are sending out a ballot in late May that will then lead to ratification in the June meeting. So if you would just stand up, say hello, and then we'll sit down and proceed. Thank you. There's a couple of other things that are going on that are really, really important, and that is around the programming. Tonight, we have a fabulous, fabulous program. Our speaker is busily trying to get ready so he can talk without a mouthful. And I'm glad someone laughed at my joke. But we've had an incredible run this spring, an incredible run through the fall. And coming up in June, we have ATD, Association for Talent Development, Got Talent. Now that is our time when 4 people get to really strut their stuff. A number of people in this room have done it in previous years. It's a gas. It's a lot of fun. And so in 12 minutes, you get to demonstrate what you do that you think you do better than anyone else, and there are 4 of you doing it. So there's a competitive submission process. You submit your application. I will embarrassingly admit that last year I said I wanted to do this, and I was not one of the 4 chosen. So the competition's good, and it is excellent. It is excellent. So I urge you to be here for the June meeting for ATD's Got Talent. And if you've got something you really think is fabulous, and we've had people do selling skills, listening skills, how to tell a story, how to do a simulation. There's all sorts of things that people have done. Submit a nomination. Maybe you'll get chosen to stretch your stuff. And it's really very, very, very cool. Part of our mission is to provide the best in learning and development to our membership, build partnerships so that you develop the network so that you can take what you know, bring it back to your organizations or to your clients so you can change the course of people's lives. Part of it is bringing cutting-edge information to you. We have a unique value proposition. If you are a member, and if you're not a member, you have access to incredible amounts of information and relationships. So coming up in June, we have 2 communities of practice. You don't have to be a chapter member to go to these. You can find out about them on the website. One is on coaching, and I got to tell you, the stuff that has happened in the coaching communities have been incredible learning experiences for me. For those of you who know me, that's not hard. For others, they even thought it was really good. So that's coaching. There's a community practice on HR analytics. That's probably one of the hottest topics in mankind today. And so last meeting, they had Bruce Fern, who is driving IBM's research in HR analytics, present. They're now talking about who else they're going to bring in. Coaching meets on June 10th in Westport. The COP for HR Analytics meets June 9th in Westport Library, both of them. The chapter sponsors this. It is free to anyone who wants to go, who wants to behave and learn. Those are the 2 key things. You got to behave, you have to learn. So you don't have to be a member. We ask that you be a member. I mean, with that $65 annual membership, you get incredible benefits, one of which is coming here and listening to the speakers like we'll have tonight from GE. So I want to say, come, be a member, join as a national member. There's incredible benefits to that also. So to my board is incredibly supportive. They're really smart, and sometimes I actually miss something and they have to remind me. Did I cover everything I needed to cover? Great. And then so they show true respect also. Thanks, Sissy. So let me hand it over to Laura, because Laura will then Laura is one of our chairs for membership.
Good evening, everybody. Very, very excited to see such a big room tonight. So I'd like to just see who's out there. So first of all, I'd like to invite any students that have joined us tonight. Could you please stand up if you're a student? And while our students are standing, I'm just going to hand the mic to Susan just for a moment.
Hi, everybody. I'm Susan O'Connor, and I'm the student chapter leader for the ATD board. And I'm very pleased to say that we're piloting the student chapter at Fairfield University first, and these are our two new selected volunteers. They're the two new leaders for the chapter, Caroline Swanson and Ben Connect. They're IO psychology students graduating this May, in another week, right? Right, so please welcome them.
And, oh, yes.
Hi, I'm Eric Marcus. I'm the coordinator of the Industrial Organizational Psychology Master's Program at University of New Haven. This is my first chapter meeting here, and we have two students, Elizabeth Bupoven and Lou Chang, and Melanie Silva, who had to run out and take, and Geronda Wallach just walked in. And Melanie Silva had to take a call outside, but she's here too, and we're hoping to get more involved with this chapter.
Thank you very much. And we are extremely excited to have more students coming into the chapter. As they say, we need to work into their generation, so they are extremely important to us, and welcome, and we hope we see you every month. I'd also like to ask any new members that have joined us tonight to please stand up. Do we have any new chapter members tonight? Okay, all right. Don't be shy. And you know what, while you're here, since there's just three of you, if you would, could you introduce yourselves?
Judith Anderson, Right Management.
Nancy Versos Consulting.
Jenna Zubb, J. Zubb and Company, Personal Leadership Coach.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us tonight. All right, and now on to the second piece of business, which is volunteer opportunities. And those of you that know me know I talk about volunteerism each month. And students, this is the big opportunity. We would love to have you volunteer. But a couple of things. Sponsorships, we are always looking for sponsorship volunteers to help us bring new sponsors into the chapter. So if there's any interest in sponsorship, you can always reach out to me or to Elena Campopiano. And all the information about volunteers is on the resource table in the back where you see Martha standing, so please pick one up on the way out. We also are always looking for help with programming. In fact, we were just brainstorming in our board meeting about new topics for programming next year, and we'd love your input. So if you're interested in helping us with programming, Sissy is here, right over here, and we would love to have help with that. And then I'll do a shameless plug for myself, being the membership director with Mary Beth, who's not here tonight. We would love some help planning some membership events. So if you are interested in event management, event planning, please reach out to me. Our contact information is on the form in the back. We'd love to have you, and thank you.
I did forget one thing, and that is Cynthia Montano, yes, please stand up, wave your arm. So this is a person who is looking for a training specialist. I will not tell you how many people have found jobs through this chapter, but I will say it's many. And so, as usual, we have someone who's looking, and I hope that there is someone who is looking so we can make the match. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Martha Kramer. I'm on the board. I want to join in the welcome to people who've been here before and new people. Very quickly, I did want to talk to you a little bit about the resource table, which is in the back. So our resource table serves several purposes. The first is to provide information about the chapter as well as about the national ATD organization. You'll see those materials right there. The second part is for us to share information among ourselves, either about our services or articles that we think are of interest. We're particularly proud that Ross Tartell has a monthly column in Training Magazine, and so we have an array of those that we encourage you to pick up and appreciate his insights as we do. If you do want to have materials about your own businesses, which we do have, I think Nancy Urell has some information. You're certainly welcome to do that. We just ask that you pick it up at the end of the evening. So that's the resource table, and I'm going to give this back to Ross.
Thank you. I'm going to now bring it over to Sissy so we can do the introduction of our speaker. One last thing. One of the things that the chapter does as part of its value proposition is simulcast the meeting. So I want to thank everybody and say hello to everyone who's dialing in. For those of you who are sitting here who are a little uncomfortable being videotaped, the camera faces forward, and so it doesn't pan the room. We have a sense of confidentiality about that. So, but it will be posted, it will be archived, and you'll be able to click in and register and do that for free. So it's a wonderful thing that the chapter provides in terms of moving our profession forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ross. Before I introduce our speaker this evening, is anyone here from Dale Carnegie, who's our sponsor for the evening? Who's here? Awesome. Come on up. Love to hear a little bit about the company. Thank you.
Thanks, Sissy. Nice to see you. All right, good evening. Oh, come on, you could do better than that. Good evening. All right, beautiful. Hey, we do want to thank Ross and the board of ATD. We have sponsored this monthly meeting. Gosh, it must be going on 4 or 5 years now, and we do enjoy it, and we like it because we know people will be here, because usually it's warm, and it didn't turn out bad for us today at 84 or 85 degrees, a little humidity, right? So we like to think that Dale Carnegie brought you that weather. All right. Anyways, we do want to thank you. We love the turnout. We know the speaker is going to be excellent. It always is every time we sponsor the event. And we just want to have you enjoy and think of Dale Carnegie for the next time you have training and development needs. So have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I have the pleasure of introducing someone who obviously doesn't need any introduction, but considering that all of us showed up here tonight, right? But I'm going to introduce him anyway. I happen to be part of Raghu's organization. I'm not going to do that sort of parochial bio of where he's worked and what he's done. I'm going to give you the inside scoop. I need my job, though, just want to say. Raghu Krishnamoorthy is part Yoda and part tenacious child. And I say that with great regard, honestly. So Yoda, that old world value, he asks us questions like, well, no, he tells us things like, we're not designing courses, we're designing leaders. Oh, right? He really is, he's someone who has like integrity to spare in everything he does. He knows each of us, he knows what motivates us, what inspires us. And he's there with more than just a little of that. That childlike behavior, how many of you have been through having a 5-year-old? Why is there air? Why can't I do that? So Raghu is like, wow, that's cool. When can we do that? What do you mean we can't do that? No, we can do that. How can we do that? So he's always challenging us that way. He's always, everything is a question and a chance to learn. And he pushes us. Now, anybody who works for Raghu knows that we're supposed to go beyond any sense of boundaries that anybody else has set for us. It's practically our charge. The good news is, when we go that far, even if we fail, it's okay. Because he's taught us to learn from the failure, to learn from the lessons that we pull from it, and to pivot or persevere, but to keep moving forward and push the envelope a little bit further. And I personally have had him come to bat for me and be there with more than a little bit of air cover, or a little ground cover, or just falling on the sword once in a while. So that for me is a true leader. And it's not, and I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding around the room, it's not the kind of leader I've had a lot of opportunity to work with, so I'm very appreciative. He is super curious. You can't keep up with his bright, shiny ideas. I guarantee you can't. If you came tonight hoping to enjoy a nice, quiet dinner with friends and just kind of chill out, sorry, you picked a bad room. Because you can't be in the room with Raghu without interacting. It's a participation sport, for sure. And so I just wanted to share that little bit. I have had the pleasure of watching very closely over the last year as Raghu has explored the environment and sort of scanned for the next set of leader capabilities. And then to be there to help him kind of flesh it out a little bit has been one of the great pleasures of my career. And so I'm going to turn it over now and let you hear firsthand from Raghu Krishnamoorthy. Might need to move it up a little.
I see the green light. Yeah, okay. So, when Sissy invited me and said, listen, we would like you to come and speak at the ATD event, I do my tours, I do my conference speeches and whatnot, but I have never done anything locally. I'm from Westport, the neighboring town. I used to live in Norwalk up here, Merritt Parkway Apartments. So for me, in some ways, it's meeting colleagues in my own neighborhood. So thanks for inviting me and having me. The topic that Sissy gave me that you folks will perhaps find appealing is the future of leadership. There is no future of leadership. It's happening right now. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of a journey we have been on in GE. Because GE has been obviously recognized for the work that we have done in leadership for a long time. But I think we have had an opportunity to reinvent ourselves, completely redefine what leadership means to us in this context. Things have changed a lot. So let me start with the story. I'm not a training person, so I learned the use of flip charts very recently. My background is HR, and in course of my work, I often go to various campuses and talk to individuals to ask them to look at joining GE. A few months ago, a colleague of mine, like many of us, went to a campus. And you know what happens in the campus the evening before. You give a presentation about the company. Next day, you have a slew of interviews. And so the evening starts with a presentation at around, say, 6:30. So this lady was all ready. She had her stress balls, the pens, all the usual stuff that goes with a presentation like this. But she found a young lad up in the top right-hand corner of the classroom very early. The presentation starts at 6:30. She was in the room at 5:45, and this kid was there. So she finishes her work and goes up to the boy and says, you must be really interested in GE to be here so early. I'm surprised. And he says, honestly, no, I'm not interested in GE. My professor told me GE is a very important company on campus. Pretend as though you're interested in them. Go and make them feel that the room is full of people wanting to join GE. But I am really not interested in you guys. So she says, what? Why are you up here then? He says, listen, I don't want to get a bad grade. I'm already really doing quite badly in my grade point average. In fact, I'm doing so badly, I don't even qualify for the minimum cutoff for you folks. Your minimum cutoff is 3.0. My GPA is 2.7. So don't waste your time on me. I'm not even going to cut the bare minimum you have in terms of GPA. She says, why did you get a 2.7? What went wrong? He says, honestly, I only took the courses that I'm interested in. Those courses, and he was a biomedical engineering student, I scored a 4.0. The other subjects I was not even interested in, I failed or barely made the pass grade. So it was actually, if you look at the overall aggregate, I got 4.0 and F. And that's why I came up with the 2.5 or 2.7. She says, why did you not take the other subjects seriously? He says, listen, my story is as follows. I lost a brother in the war. And for me, ever since, my objective is to help people. And I'm in biomedical engineering because I want to save lives. I have 2 patents to produce prosthetic limbs for wounded war veterans. And I've created a couple of non-profit organizations that helps fund the prosthetic limbs that I could give to these wounded war veterans. That's my passion. So please don't bother with me. Go back to your stress balls, figure out what you need to do, and leave me alone. You guys have all worked in corporations. You have consulted with corporations. Would you hire this individual? Why? Passion, purpose, commitment, knows what he wants. There is a sense of contribution, making an impact, right? GPA. Where's GPA? The minimum qualification is GPA. Why wouldn't you? He's got only 2.7, so he doesn't cut off. Would you say, since he didn't make 3.0, we should not hire him? Why would you not do that? He was very honest.
How he was doing it. He said, hey, and the things I love, I'm passionate about, I'm there.
Right.
The other things that
Yeah. So here is the point. When we came back to the organization and asked the same question to a group of very experienced GE leaders, half of them said, we will hire him. The other half said, no, we won't hire him. And you know the reason why they said we won't hire him? Because they said the system will kill the guy. Right? Here lies the point. An entire program goes for a toss if we hire a 2.7 GPA. What will you tell everybody else? Right? My point here is we've all been conditioned to start a view of leadership through the lens of cognitive intelligence. You start with GPA 4.0, then you look at individuals' problem solving and analytical skills, then you see whether the person has interpersonal skills after a thought, and then see whether the person has any traits. We have to completely reverse that. Instead, cognitive skills are a given. You go to any good university, if they don't have a smart individual, if you go to Yale across in the neighborhood or Fairfield University where we have great students from, or any of the other universities that's represented here or in the neighborhood, most of the people who go in are pretty smart. If cognitive skills are a pretty reasonable given, what you look for is not that. That's the job of the university. What you look for are the differentiating factors that is going to cut the individual from the rest. And therefore, the reason you wanted to hire this particular individual was that you saw something deeper in the individual than just intelligence, right? So far, you're with me? So I want you to keep this in the background when we talk about leadership and how at GE we are reframing the whole equation, saying that we are no longer hiring for cognitive skills. That we assume is an entry ticket. If you don't have it, you don't pass the muster. But once you go to a good university and you have the bare minimum, sometimes not even the GPA, you actually start looking at everything else. And what is that everything else? And to lay the context for everything else, let me start with a question that you all know the answer to. Is the world moving this way or is the world moving this way? A or B? Right? So, B, how many of you think the world is moving in a linear, slow growth, Or how many of you think the world is moving in exponential way?
You're talking about growth, or what's the question? The rate of change?
Rate of change.
Oh, the rate of change.
Rate of change. Oh, rate of growth is here. Is a C. Rate of change. But if you look at rate of change, it's exponential. And how many of you know what's going to happen this year? How many of you predicted Ebola? How many of you predicted what happened in 2013? What happened in 2013 that you didn't predict? What's that? Stock market did well. But what event in the world screwed things up? Arab Spring. When you don't find anything, you can always blame the Middle East. Something is always happening there, right? But before that, tsunami, before that, oil spill. Every year there is something that you don't predict. See, Conference Executive Board says that the magnitude of change, the kind of change, has really gone a lot of change, right? We live in a world that is completely uncertain. Most of our organizations are designed for predictability in a world of uncertainty, right? They're designed for predictability, but we live in a world of uncertainty. So that's number one. The second thing so one is uncertainty. It's a very important factor for us to keep in mind. The second is generational differences. So let me give you a couple of examples of generational differences. And you have some representation of that generation here. Let's take my age and say some of the students here who are 25 or below, 25, say 55, right? So qualifications, MBA or something like that. Here it may be a master's in fine arts for all you know, or something else. Favorite accessory, mine could be a Rolex watch, even though it will be a fake Rolex watch, and for them it will be a tattoo. Favorite drink for me is, if I get a decaf coffee, that's fine. Here it's soy, no whipped cream, frappuccino, or something like that. Then you look at the fact that I have maybe 11 suits. Here you have 11 sneakers. Favorite book for me, coming from G, straight from the gut. And here it could be Long Road to Freedom, something like that. So you have a very different demographic. But the obvious issue is not the demographic difference, it's the psychographic difference. And what we learned when we looked at a group of youngsters in our company, and we actually had a group called the Global New Directions Group, who gave us some very interesting perspective, not in terms of the superficial elements of, okay, how you dress and so on and so forth, but how they think. And what we learned was that group, this is the 55-year-old, this is the 25-year-old. I compete to win. I collaborate to win. For me, I'm brought up on command and control. I'm brought up on connect and inspire. Loyalty drives my retention. Innovation drives my retention. I fit in. I want to be recognized for my uniqueness. Right? You can add a few other things. Inspire me to stay. Be a boss. Be a coach. And so on and so forth. This entire paradigm actually talks to the fact that there is a different set of expectations in this demographic in terms of what they expect from organizations, what they expect from leaders. So that's the second difference I see. The third difference is technology. Here is the whole thing about technology. What you say are at technology, connectedness, and so on and so forth. But two aspects that you need to know. Many of us think talent is scarce. Technology has made talent abundant. I'll give you one example. All of you have flown before. Any of you a pilot here? Right, so if you have you flown a 737?
Private planes.
Private planes. But you all know when you fly, you look at an engine, we manufacture the jet engine, right? The jet engine is an extremely important part of the aircraft, right? Thank you very much. So the jet engine is held on brackets to the wing, right? And the lighter the weight of the engine, the more is the fuel efficiency. It's a very simple physics, and when any 1% improvement in fuel efficiency, as you would know, increases the margins and profitability for any airline. So we always try and reduce the weight of the engine, and we now, for the new Boeing 737s called the MAX, we are looking at an engine that's made of ceramic matrix composites, so that will reduce the weight of the aircraft. However, for a long time, we found that we were not able to come up with a design that would reduce the weight of the bracket that will hold the engine on to the aircraft. The bracket weighed about 2,500 grams, right? So our world's best PhDs and engineers in the aerospace engineers that we have, many of them from MIT or NASA, couldn't figure out. They figured out how to reduce the weight of the engine from 15,000 pounds to 12,000 pounds. But this 2,500 grams was creating a problem. And you'd have several brackets, but this one, so they were really struggling to figure out, how do I reduce the weight of this bracket? So after spending millions of dollars, as you would expect these folks to do, including with associations with universities, somebody hit upon an idea, why don't we crowdsource ideas from the world to see who can come up with a design? They said, that's impossible. We've got the world's best engineers. So who would be able to come up with a design? Some fellow somewhere or this? We said, let's do it. What's the harm? Okay, we can't give you too much money. How much can you spare us? $20,000. All right, after spending $50 million and not being successful, we'll give you $20,000. So they looked at this $20,000 and they said, all right, let's go and figure out what happened. There were 700 entries for this challenge, right? And the top winner was a motorcycle mechanic from a place called Salatiga, Indonesia. How many of you have heard of Salatiga, Indonesia? Right. This person wouldn't have made any of our specs for an engineer. But he came up with a design that was not, our intention was, can you reduce the weight of the bracket by 30%? He came up with a design that reduced the weight of the bracket by 84%. Now tell me, which leadership program would ensnare him? So talent is there. How you tap, how you connect with talent rather than own talent becomes very, very critical. And the only way that can happen is when you can have technology giving you access to the talent. So technology changes the game from making talent scarce to actually making talent abundant. However, our systems and processes are programmed and conditioned to own talent, not connect with talent. And there are different ways of thinking about the talent of the future. But that's not the topic. I'm just giving you a flavor of the fact that the world is changing. So these are three, and there could be others. I'm sure you will have other examples of how the world is changing. So given all these changes, we said we have to fundamentally rewire what leadership is all about. Because if talent is abundant, intelligence is increasingly a commodity because it's cognitive skills and whatnot. You can get a person from Salatiga, Indonesia to give you stuff. The only differentiator is leadership. If that is the differentiator, what is the leadership of the future that will make a difference? That is the research question. So here is what we did. We said, let's look at talking to our own leaders. Let's then look at looking at a book review of articles, and hundreds of books and articles have been written. Then let's talk to new age leaders, new age thinkers like Simon Sinek, Daniel Pink, and those folks who are thinking differently on leadership. And then let's do a research on the 100 most admired company leaders. What traits do they bring to the table? Or let's look at the MIT Smart 50, which represents the new age leaders, and see what traits do they bring to the table. I'll give you a couple of examples, right? So when we looked at what our leaders brought to the table, in typical GE fashion, these folks looked at execution, inspiring audiences, mobilizing change, financial savvy. Customer was somewhere here. This is GE leaders, right? Then we looked at the folks from the most admired company, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, American Express. There we found a few more things like execution, media savvy, and so on and so forth. Risk-taking, number 27. Then we looked at these characters, the new age leaders, the Uber fellow or Mark Zuckerberg, and so on and so forth. What do they bring to the table? Risk-taking was somewhere here. Emotional intelligence was 27. So it takes all kinds for us to look at leadership. But out of this exercise, we synthesized our learnings and said, okay, what do we want our leaders to be? Right? And out of that comes the work that we did, that Sissy is helping me out on. Say, what do we hire for is different from what we hired for earlier. Now, when we hire for, what we hire for is, first, hunger to win. Does the person have a hunger? Again, going back to this individual I was talking about in the campus, there's a hunger in the person to make a difference, to win. Second, not just integrity, but transparency. Because integrity by itself is no longer adequate. Integrity is how you think. It's in a public, open world. Transparency is equally critical. Third, a sense of accountability. And this is an extremely important one. What do we mean by sense of accountability? Because most of us, at least in our generations, when I ask you the question, who are the most important stakeholders of a company? So inevitable, who are the most important stakeholders of a company? Customers, employees, shareholders. That's obvious, right? I actually question that. When you make an employee a stakeholder, he becomes a consumer, not a co-creator. In which case, he or she is looking for the management leadership to give them whatever is required. You become a consumer. Just like if you are a citizen consuming from the society and community, not giving back, you become a burden. So the same way, we said accountability is when I own my space. Right? Then we said the other one is grit and resilience. The ability to sustain through the ups and downs in a world of uncertainty. What does that look like? It's really hardcore. The ability to withstand the pressures, the ups and downs, inevitably we are all going to go through, because this line that I shared with you is not a pleasant line. First of all, this looks so smooth. Actually, the world is like this. Right? So grit was the other one. And finally, we said learning. Somebody who's a learner. Learning ability. So these are the 5 things we look for when we hire a person, especially from the campuses. GPA is incidental, it's important, it's a given. Cognitive skills are a given. These are inner traits that we need to look at evaluating for when we hire a person. Because that differentiates the people long term. But everything else is a commodity, right? Then what we said, all right, let's look at what GE does well. What GE does well is our GE leaders are pretty good at the following. Inspiring audiences, which we found. Mobilizing change. We're good at discipline execution, good at systems thinking, and so on. These are very typical. You go to GE, that's what you're recognized for. Any of you who are headhunters, when you look for GE people, this is what you get. Then we said, all right, but what do we learn from these new age mavericks? And I wanted to use the word weirdos, but I'll be kinder there. You know, really a lot. Really a lot. The first thing is you want leaders to be a lot more authentic. And authenticity engenders trust. And these days, since when you talk about trust, you're giving a piece of yourself to somebody else. You will never give it to anybody who is inauthentic, or whatever that word is. Authenticity in our world means where self-confidence meets self-awareness. If you have more confidence than awareness, you're a jerk. If you have more awareness than confidence, you're not assertive enough. So it's a perfect intersection of self-confidence and self-awareness. That is our definition of authenticity. The second thing we said is judgment. Now this in the GE world is extremely critical because the GE world is full of process creatures. Right? We believe in Six Sigma. We believe that once you establish a process, the process itself determines the output. No longer. In a volatile world where it's designing for uncertainty, not predictability, processes have to be governed by judgment, where you can push the risk boundaries and where you can step back and say, here is the risk that I'm willing to take, here is the risk I'm not willing to take. So what is the exercise of judgment you're willing to make? Third, you're looking at pioneer. Somebody who is willing to push the boundaries, go places where no man has been before. Willing to see what's there for the long term and willing to make the bets now that will shape the future going forward. Next one is somebody who is edgy. And of course, this harks back to the Jack Welch era of edge, edge, edge. But when we talk about edgy, it's willing to stay the course. A little bit of the character of resilience coming through, that I believe in this, the strength of conviction that you need to charge ahead despite the headwinds that you're going to suffer. In a company like GE, yeah, you will suffer headwinds, a lot of headwinds, because it's a large company. You'll have people who will say no, who will perhaps think differently. You got to stand tall in terms of making sure you push through. So these are some traits we are trying to actually now say we need to build for. So the charge I have with SCC and others is how do I hire, how do I keep this, but how do I add this? Because, you know, the last chart I want to share with you is we learned through this process there are some fundamental shifts happening. And in the larger world, it's increasingly about not about what we know, but how we learn. I don't know whether you can see that. Less about what we know, and anybody who's in software realizes that the moment you know the software today and pass your certification, it's obsolete. Right? You got to keep yourself abreast. Same thing. Knowledge is a given. In fact, I would say that in institutions, in our case, we don't even talk about stuff. You're expected to know that stuff. We want to inculcate curiosity, learning, and so on, and exploration, and so on and so forth. It's changing the way we are designing courses. Second, we are talking about less about experiences, because experiences are designed in a world of predictability, and we're talking about improvisation, which is very different. Third, we're saying less about resources, more about resourcefulness. Next, we are saying less about competencies, more about application. Finally, less about individual and more about the team. This is the design of the organization in terms of Crotonville, in terms of learning, we are moving to. So among the training that we do, the intact team training is the most popular one, because there you bring about a mean shift in the whole team. So you say, this is the mean now, I can actually scale for the whole team to a higher level by putting the whole team through a change management program. Improvisation, immersion, resourcefulness. So when we actually start a course these days, we bring all of them, we give them, say, 4 different pair of hats, put them in Manhattan and say, find every one of your folks, every one of your other classmates in the course. Obviously give them some directions, but the point here is the real life consists of navigating your way, having an adventure in the unknown. So what does that look like? And you use that as a learning point to really pivot about what does it mean in an uncertain world where you really don't know what's happening. So this is changing the design of the leader. Our responsibility is to make sure as we look at 2020, our leaders are equipped for what is appropriate in the new context. And we create the environment which allows them to develop with the right interventions from our side so that they actually become different and actually go out of Crotonville or any learning platform transformed. So that's been our endeavor. That's been the journey we have been on. It gives you a flavor of the why we've started working on this and what we landed up with. So hopefully gives you a flavor, and I'm now open to questions. Yes?
You talked in your first example about the student. What came to mind with me not only was passion, but passion to do the right thing. And it's important, I think, and you illustrated in a couple of different places, to have that kind of foundational business ethics, business culture. How do you balance that as you're going forward, asking people to be innovative and to take risks and so forth? How are you teaching leaders how to?
That's why integrity and transparency is so critical. There's another thing that I think the definition of success is increasingly less about positionship, which is what you equated leadership to, right? Leadership used to be positionship for a long, long time. And our new definition is contribution and impact. So the other thing that becomes very important is our definition of success could also be, for the organization, could be profits. And now we say purpose. So one of the things that we end up, that's why the story made a lot, what's your purpose? And that purpose was very clear in this individual. And that provides you the moral compass in terms of what your contribution and impact to the world could be. That is a phenomenal gift that person brings to the company. Really probing and finding that is a job that we need to really think about for the people who are recruiting. Okay? Yes, Jane?
So, Raghu, thank you very much for speaking tonight. It's great to see you. I just wanted to ask, I have a big voice.
No,
okay.
cool.
All right. So you talked about authenticity.
Yeah.
How can you teach that? And if so, how?
You can't teach a lot, Jane. For instance, you can't teach trust. You can't teach speed. You can't teach courage. So on authenticity, one of the things we have done is every leader, including Jeff, when he goes to an MDC, BMC, or an EDC, any of our courses, goes with 1 page, 3 pages, goes through the career journey, including all the successes and the failures the person have had, and then puts up 1 page. And that page consists, it's a standard page for everyone, right? And that page consists of my strengths, my development needs, what opportunities do I have to be a better leader for you. And that opens up the conversation to the participants and makes it okay for them to share their own vulnerabilities, so to speak. So by exploring your vulnerability, saying this is who I am, right? For instance, in my case, my biggest vulnerability, and I've shared this with my team, is while I'm this creative 5-year-old, right? Sometimes these people wish I was an adult to operationalize stuff that I come up with. I need somebody who can help me operationalize stuff. right? So I know my weakness, and I always try and supplement my strengths with somebody else's strengths, because otherwise I would be incomplete. Courage. We now do something called explorations, where we said, let's take people to Normandy. For instance, this year we took our leaders, the senior-most leaders, not the middle levels, to Normandy. And Normandy, what we actually had Susan Eisenhower, who is Dwight Eisenhower's granddaughter, come and speak to us about how her grandfather managed the Allied forces. We also had 4 veterans come and talk about how it was to face the landing. And then you go back and reflect on what it means in your own world. We actually are this year walking Selma Bridge to explore what does it mean to go through that experience and how we can internalize that in our world. We have a 9/11 debris, the New York Fire Department, for the help we gave them after 9/11, gave us a piece of debris from 9/11, and we have that installed in Crotonville. And we take our students to reflect how that particular movement shaped the course of so many lives in a country or more than one country. So what does it mean for us? So you use different techniques now to really internalize some of these learnings, because what you're doing is invoking, not teaching. Okay? Yes?
I'm curious, what are the differences between Welsh and Imholt as leaders? I'm
apologize,
sorry.
we're recording.
Yeah, the difference between Jack Welch and Jeffrey Imholt as leaders. And in 9/11/01, that was his first day on the job as a CEO.
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah. I'm just curious, what are the differences? Because they strike me as being very different personalities.
And, the only thing I would say is the context played a bigger role than the character. So let me give you an example, right? Okay. If you had the job in the 90s, you would have done exactly the same thing Jack Welch would have done. And if you had the job in
if I had that ability.
I'll tell you what. I knew it. I'll make this easy for you. What was the growth rate in the US in the 90s? GDP growth rate.
It was high, 4 or 5%?
Anybody else? 1 to 2%.
1 to 2.
US was 1 to 2%. UK and Western Europe, China, Brazil. Just take 4 of these countries, okay? Let's take the 90s. Let's take the first part of the decade and after 2010, okay? US, 1 to 2%. Western Europe, 1 to 2%. And China in the first part of 90s was low, through 3%, and it went on to be higher into 6-7%. Brazil was 0 or low. In this part of the world, what happened after 9/11? Almost 0 to 1%, 0 to 1%, and here it was 8 to 10%, and here it was, say, 5%, right? And then in the current decade, it's now 1 to 2% again, 1 to 2% again, or less than, and then you start looking at 5 to 6%. Now you have Africa going at 8 to 10%, right? You had 1 to 2%, 1 to 2%, and China was not growing. What option did Jack have? More margin. If he had to grow, what did he have to do? Cut costs.
Yeah.
Outsource to China or Mexico. Put Six Sigma discipline, quality, rigor, so that your margins got, right? There you know. Your margins were high. So would you have done that?
If I thought it'd work, yes.
Yeah, that's what Jack. Now here comes Jeff. There is no growth here. You squeezed out costs. Where are you growing? So you say, I'm going to China. China is second home for me. So you just start ramping up externally outside the US. Right? And now you come back to this world and you say, I'm growing in Africa because that's where the growth is. And we are an infrastructure business. Infrastructure directly correlates to GDP growth. So, in other words, you're just as good as Jack or Jeff. My point here, I'm trivializing here.
Right.
My point here is that at each stage, the context defined the expectations of the leader. And to do so, one of the things that is consistent is each had to change the culture. And in doing that, the way we looked at changing the culture is at an individual level, at a systemic level, right? And at a technical level and a cultural level. So at the individual and technical level, it was Six Sigma. At system level, and so it's black belt, green belt, and so on and so forth. Here it was all about workout and CAP and so on and so forth. That's what we did. Here, at the cultural level, it was the 4 E's, or whatever then these were the values. The G value, the values that, but Jeff used the same thing. Only here, this was to drive control, quality, rigor, margins, and so on. So the entire technology of the company, the operating disciplines of the company, we get towards that. Now comes the Jeff Immelt era. You look at the same paradigm, and what does he do there? So he says, all right, individual, systemic, or company-wide, technical, cultural. So what does he do? At individual country, he says, all right, everybody has to go through marketing training or training on growth and skills. Here at the systemic level, he talks about growth as a process. I don't know whether you've heard of that. And then on cultural stuff, he talks about growth traits. And here he does something else. But the point I'm trying to make is the orientation that was appropriate in the context drove the strategy. Mm-hmm. And likewise, now we are talking about a very different world. You're using FastWorks which is, how do you get to things faster? Mm-hmm. GE believes as the new cultural vehicle. So we are changing our performance development system. My performance development system is no longer the EMS form, the forced ranking. It is this. I've got it on my mobile phone. At the end of this meeting, I'm going to ask Sissy, give me some insights. We are not calling it feedback anymore, because feedback automatically raises a defense mechanism in each of us. Sure. We're calling it insights. Give me an insight, right? And then the insights can be given by your boss, but also by your peers and subordinates. Oftentimes, the boss is 5,000 miles away. And there are only two insights. Continue or consider. Continue doing something, consider changing something. So it makes it very simple. It's online, and you can do it anytime you want. It's real time. It's not that I do this presentation, and next year in March, when she gives me the appraisal, she says, on the 11th of May, you screwed it up bad. It's real time. And then it aggregates automatically through algorithms, and it goes into analytics database where I know what are the key issues that I need to develop people on in terms of learning. So you're changing with the times based on what is happening. So each of them have used, even now, between the time that Jeff started and now, this map has changed because the world is different. After 2008, 2009, we have had to reset it again. The point I'm trying to make is Jack or Jeff, the context determined the orientation. Mm-hmm. Of course, there are differences. I mean, of course, Jack is different, Jeff is different, but I'm talking at a higher organizational level. The orientation is based on the context. Yes.
Your comments about providing insight, I think, are very interesting, because that then begins to speak to the technology of the organization in terms of performance management.
Yeah.
And GE is known for the technology and the structures of its succession planning, performance management processes. So how has this change begun to influence the technology that GE uses in succession planning, performance management, those key processes?
The same rigor exists. As a person in charge of the process, we have actually changed the famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, the Session C process. Session C process for a long time has been about talent review, right? I go to a business, I look at, okay, tell me what capabilities you have. No longer. That's no longer adequate. That's only 50% of the equation. We are now calling it a very grand, completely innovative name called people process, people review. The reason we're calling it people, the talent review is only 50% of the equation. But I'm in 175 countries. GE is in 175 countries. So it's not just adequate to see whether you have the right talent, but it's important to see whether the talent has a place in GE. So if I'm a 25-year-old in Ghana, how would I look at the G and say, this is the place where I can fulfill my ambitions and dreams? Are we creating the right environment and context? So what we have done is not only looking at talent, but also looking at the environment in each of these places, each of these businesses, to see that the 25-year-old can meet his or her aspirations in the company. Looking at the context is as important as looking at the talent. So that's one way it has changed. Because otherwise, why would that kid who said, I don't fit the bill, want to work for us? So among other things, one of the important aspects of the context is, does every team has a purpose? Does every business have a purpose? Because purpose today is your contribution to making the world better. And most of the youngsters resonate a lot more with that than, okay, come on in, I'm going to give you a $50,000 bonus. That'll help. But the fact, show me why I should give my discretionary effort to you. What is it that you're making? What is it you're doing to the world that makes me believe that I can be a part of the larger equation to help? And I think there's one other thing I really forgot here. Yeah. Sorry, you reminded me. There are 5 elements here. There is one more, and that is, are you a giver? Because we're all used to a transactional equation with the organization. I give as much as I take. In future, leaders have to be givers, where their equation to society is as important as their equation to the organization. So if you don't care about others, why should anybody care about you? That's a fundamental premise with which you operate. So among other things, when we look at candidates now, or when we look at executives, when I look at promotions for senior executives into vice presidents and whatnot, among other things, one of the questions Jeff or any of us will ask is, what are you involved in? What's your personal passion? It doesn't matter. You could be on the school board, you could be on the non-profit, the museum, doesn't matter. It demonstrates to us you care. And giver becomes a very important part of the equation. What else? Yes. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't sure who you were going to. So I was just curious because I know that you spoke to the generational differences between millennials and other generations. But I was just wondering, in terms of development, and I know that everyone's assessed basically on the same attributes and traits and other characteristics, but have you seen any challenges amongst generations in terms of getting leadership opportunities or development areas?
You know, those challenges will always remain, right? At every generation, you have some challenges. I would say that the biggest challenge we have seen is that our world, we were brought up to fit in, and therefore, over a period of time, we lost our individuality. The younger generation would rather keep their individuality and find the place that nourishes that. And therefore, that's why the whole thing about people reviews, are we providing the right context, becomes a very powerful question, because our anxiety is if we don't, people will opt for other jobs, other organizations. So the tolerance level for not sinking in with what is required appropriately is much lower. You know, you'll find a lot of people of my generation having switched off, but tolerate their existence in the organization without passion. That is a lost cause. That's a lost gift. And the cynicism and the skepticism is actually detrimental to everybody. I would hope that the millennials never lose that energy and never try and fit in, because in fitting in, you lose your individuality. I think that is what our struggle is. How do you pivot quickly enough to balance the expectation of the new generation? And how do we make sure that the people have some tolerance to the journey, not just the destination? Yeah, we have one question here, a couple of other questions.
In sports, it's really well known that you have to practice, and you have to practice in a very deliberate way. Could you speak to what I've seen in corporations, and I just coached 20 leaders as part of the CLS CTS program, and the idea where you have like a one-day workshop on, say, coaching, and then there's like very little or no follow-up. And this idea that you just go to a class and then there seems to be very little opportunities to practice. Every day is a game day. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One of the reasons, for instance, the new performance development system is being scaled over a couple of years. Our biggest apprehension is not the tool. Our biggest apprehension is the fact that the tool is incidental, the conversation and the dialogue is extremely critical. And the conversation, if it's not a coaching conversation, it can put you off forever, right? How do we teach the manager and the employee to really have a very thoughtful, intentional coaching dialogue? And that is, you have to create two things. One is you have to create the touch point to do that. You have to create the practice to do that. You also have to create the receptiveness to that coaching. So employees need to be taught how to receive the coaching. The managers or colleagues or peers need to be taught. I had one example, right? So, for instance, one of my colleagues was narrating this example. I had a staff meeting, and like some staff meetings, it went very south. I brought all the team together to feel all energized and pumped up. We were all feeling very low at the end of it, right? So I asked everybody to reflect and give each other insights as to what went wrong. So this colleague of mine did that. So out of that, one of the other individuals responded, "You did continue this. And she said, "But Raghu, the boss asked us to reflect on what we should consider changing. Can you give me some consider feedback?" No reply for 1 week. Right? At the end of 1 week, she replied, "I really value your consider insights." Then with almost reluctance, the person comes up with one paragraph which you should consider doing. Now, these are very proven, seasoned HR people, by the way. So she goes evening and thanks the individual. "Thank you for giving me the consider insight. Really appreciate it. That was great insight." The person said, "I am so relieved. You didn't take it amiss." Right? And this is within HR. Can you imagine how complex it will be for a line manager and the employee if we in HR, who are hopefully somewhat more attuned to giving coaching and feedback, finding it difficult, the normal line manager. So the one-day coaching will take the horse to the water. It will not make it drink. So we are not, by any stretch of imagination, under the illusion this is going to transform people. Nor do we think we'll have the capacity to have an individual coach to every one of the 360,000 employees. So we have to now create and mobilize the larger organization to get into practice. And the way you practice is give consider insight on writing and make sure that the employee himself or herself asks for more thoughts and how do I. We are also doing one other thing. We are integrating the tool with the learning opportunity. The next generation of this is when I go back, suppose I suck at listening, right? I go back to the office and I say, all right, my boss gave me feedback, I'm horrible at listening. Outcomes, here are thoughts for you. Here are 3 webinars, 2 classes, 2 podcasts you can listen on listening. Okay, so I am going to be going to this class. Immediately you'll see 10 other people who are enrolled for the same class. And then you can add a practice in that allows you to say, all right, I'm going to expand my skills in this. And you can create a social learning atmosphere, social coaching atmosphere that allows you to be better. So you're trying a few different ways, but this is going to be a long haul. No one coaching class, not even 2-day classes, not even 3-day classes is going to solve it unless you actually practice. And managers have to get much better at doing that. And we actually are training the age. That's the reason when we started scaling, we actually have the entire HR organization go through it first. Another thing, this may be sacrilegious, we are trying no ratings.
Ooh, yeah.
I tell you, that is a leap too far. The biggest resistance we get on no ratings is from the HR folks. Right? Because the manager has a lot more comfort in giving feedback when he or she feels that this is not associated with. That's why we're calling it performance development, not performance management. So we're trying many things to address this issue, but we realize it's going to be a long haul.
So getting back to the exponential growth,
yes,
right? We'll see a lot of punctuations, a lot of changes coming up. So can you make the distinction of when prediction is appropriate and when this lens through seeing is appropriate?
So I'll tell you, when you are designing a jet engine, you're designing it for predictability. You don't want to say, let's take it easy, let's change it mid-flight. It doesn't happen. So there are non-negotiables on designing for predictability. Anything that affects lives, anything that affects safety, anything that affects the reputation of the company, compliance, integrity, predictable. Compliance process have to be predictable. You got to make sure nobody screws it up. Anything else is based on the changes to the context. The problem is, what happens is when you design for predictability, the context changes, your organization gets calcified and immobile, because that's where the problem of breakthrough change happens, that you are not able to break through. And that's why somebody who's starting let me ask you this question, okay? Let me just say, all right, when you are starting an organization, rank order in importance: structure, vision, culture, talent. Rank order, when you're starting on a fresh sheet of paper, what comes first, second, third, and fourth? Vision first, culture second, talent third. In an existing organization, what do you start with first? It freezes you. It doesn't allow you to change, right? So what I'm saying is, in an environment of uncertainty, structure has to be malleable. Otherwise, it'll freeze you. That's why new models like holacracy and adaptive concepts become very important, because you need to morph as the world changes fast. Okay? All right.
Let's talk politics. This is a tough question, all right? You have one manager who has 100 to win, integrity, transparency, sense of accountability, grit, resilience, learning, judgment, pioneer, and is edgy, and the numbers are just so-so. You got somebody else who's really autocratic, mean, burns people up in the organization, and is blowing the numbers out of the water. What do you do?
It's not politics, it's reality.
That's right.
Yeah, I think you got to take a serious look at that. That's why when we measure that's the whole paradigm, or when you look at GE beliefs and GE culture and so on and so forth, measuring people on values is as important as measuring people on performance. And that hasn't gone away. So whatever be the new incarnation of those values, we still measure people on them. And that becomes actually, again, a ticket to play. You don't have it, you don't exist. Fortunately for us, Jack did a great job of setting that discipline on, and that has never changed for us. And sometimes what happens is, sometimes an individual can fake it for some time, but over a period of time, especially I'll give you an example, right? I was in one of our countries. We have 5 new GE beliefs. We'll call them beliefs. Somebody wanted to call them manifesto. Somebody else wanted to call them commandments. Whatever it is. These are new values. The first one is customers determine our success. It's a statement of fact. It's not even a belief. It's a statement of fact. And then you have empower and inspire, blah, blah, blah. In one country, the customers determine our success was taken to excess. Because then what the leader was able to do is bully everybody. Say, customers said this, you better do it, right? That's where you then have to, the manager has to lead in with the judgment, saying, all right, okay, guys, Now you're polluting the intention of the beliefs. And how do you walk back and say, no, that's not tolerated? So that individual has been fired. But by doing so, you really dramatize the example for others, saying that it is both, and both are equally important.
Raghu, we have a question.
Sure.
Just, actually, it's sort of, my question really mirrors what you put on the flip chart, but if you think about 3, 4, 5 years down the line, what would the aspirational vision be for the culture, the structure, the talent?
And I don't know the answer to that. The one thing I will tell you, the cycles are going faster, right? Mm-hmm. What Jack said stayed for 20 years. What Jeff said first 8 years, then we have changed it again. As the cycles go faster, in 3 years' time, we may need to change all over again for something more relevant. If I knew that, I would be a consultant.
Amen.
Yeah, the CAP process, yeah.
But today, change is happening all
Yeah.
the time, and we have a new generation of millennials. How are you approaching leaders? How are you directing leaders? Any changes in the way we manage change now with the millennials? And do you have any insights for us on that?
Here's the point, right? The 7-step process. You have, CAP, right? Let's take BP oil spill. I'm taking an external example because I don't want to obviously dramatize anything happening in GE. But if we take BP oil spill, the oil spill happened, you have to fix it. Would you take the 7-step process to fix it? You have to fix it right then and there. You have to manage that. That's where the judgment part becomes a lot more important. You focus a lot more. Don't use the process when you need to use the judgment. And that, therefore, you amplify as with a lot of examples as to what does judgment mean. Because in GE, you fall out. Variance was an evil. Variance is a friend because it teaches you what not to do. Can you tell that to a GE person? The person goes, you're cookie. You'll be out of the company in 2 days' time because that is not GE. We're trying to educate people. All right, let me give you an example. FastWorks is a great example of this. FastWorks is a new toolkit, which is Six Sigma. You design, analyze, measure. You know that story. In FastWorks, you say, all right, I'm going to give you, if I had to think of a new product, earlier you would come and say, this is going to cost me $300 million. I'm going to spend the next 3 years using my PhDs and coming up with the world's best product that will then flow to the market, and the market will say, this is God's gift to mankind. No longer. We say, all right, guys, I'll give you $30 million. Create a prototype, go to the market, check whether it works. If it works, I'll give you the next 30. If it doesn't, we'll do something else. So the whole venture capitalist mindset, the whole Silicon Valley mindset has come into the company. It's a long way from being perfect, but that's where we are heading right now.
So what are you doing to tell leaders or working with the leader? Is there anything that you're doing to work with the leaders who are already in place, who have been used to a slower change management, to give them some insight as to how to work in this FastWorks environment? So
we only train the top 5,000 people. The first training we did on FastWorks were the top 5,000 people. And every time we had a project, it's not just enough to train, to your point. We actually had coaches, FastWorks coaches for every one of them. Now we have other evolutions, FastWorks influencers, and a whole host of people reminiscent of the Six Sigma efforts with a different toolkit right now to drive the FastWorks in the company. Designing a course. I'll give you an example. One of my colleagues, on an average, a course would take 3 to 4 weeks to design. We now design a course in 3 days, which includes customer inputs, prototyping, delivering, and getting the subject matters in. 3 days. One more question. Yeah. Last question.
It sounds like a lot of what you're talking about is personal branding. Is the idea of as the change in the workplace is going so quickly and you're looking for all of these qualities, are you investing in a personal branding process for your leaders for them to be able to
That is Sissy's job. So one of the things that you should talk about how we do that, Sissy. That's all right. No.
It looks like it's on. We do it in every way. I think that's the beauty of GE, frankly. Everyone who talks to a leader population talks about it. It's kept alive. We do coach in the moment all of the time. You can't hear our chairman come and talk without talking about 4 pivotal things, and it will always include simplification and fast works and adapting our environment and the culture. So it's everywhere. There's no one place that you're going to find it. It's embedded, and that's part of what we do.
And the other thing is when we do the migration to leadership, executive band, senior executive, every one of them has something called expectations, and we level set what we expect from a leader of that level as they go forward. So we try and calibrate. Now guys, this is a journey, right? It's not perfect by no stretch of imagination, and sometimes it's more painful to go through it, and that's where we have to remind, hey, we are talking about grit to everybody else, let's have some grit ourselves. Because it is oftentimes facing headwinds. Culturally, for instance, you go and try and tell people in China, give consider insights. They said, you're nuts. We will go to jail if you give consider insights. So you got to be careful in terms of cultural nuances and appreciate the fact that they have a point of view. You go to Germany, works councils. We have 176 works councils. All of them want to have a role in, this is not. This much openness is lack of privacy. And no. So you have all kinds of issues, practical issues to deal with. But we are forging ahead because I think we believe this is the future. And hopefully we'll live to tell the tale.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we've got quite a glimpse of what the future may hold, but who knows where it's really going to end up with the nature of the fast cycles. One quick insight. They started at the top with only 5,000 managers when they were training FastWorks. You have quite the chore and quite the load to carry. So thank you for tonight. This was special, a really special evening. Thank you. But it's not over yet. So tonight, there's a couple of things that need to happen. First of all, you have evaluations. So Raghu talked about insight and consideration. We have a little more of a formal process to do that, but we still have insight and consideration. And I'm also going to call Michelle Beccarelli up to help here because we have a raffle. So how many of you are not members of the chapter yet or are guests? That goes for students. Okay. There were 2 baskets, one for members and one for non-members. So if we are about to do a raffle for a free meeting. So if you're a non-member or a visitor or a guest and you haven't contributed thrown your card into the basket yet to be eligible for the drawing, look for Martha Kramer. There you can tell by the sign. If you are a member, then you look for Michelle Beccarelli. And we'll pull those in just a minute. So as they're going around, I just want to remind you about the COPs, the Communities of Practice, June 9th for HR Analytics, June 10th for the coaching, and we've got Denise D'Agostino, who is one of the co-chairs on coaching, and we have Richard Montanaro, who's the head of the HR Analytics. A special thank you to Discover Video, and Kevin, if you would wave your hand. They are a very important part and a key partner with us in terms of the broadcast of the simulcast. They do this as part of their service to the profession. So a special thank you. To those of you who have been viewing tonight, you missed a great interaction, fabulous time. See you in June. So on that note, we have a couple of things. I know Dale Carnegie has a book to contribute that we will pull in a moment. I know that Nancy Urell has both a book and an assessment of leadership. Thank you. Nancy, wave your hand. Thank you. That we will pull in a moment. But the first thing I have to do is the process works this way, and I have to use some judgment on this. I have to pull the non-members first for who's there. Then I'll pull the members for the free meeting there, and then I'm going to combine the two so everybody has an equal chance on everything else. So for the non-members, we have, this is non-members? George, are you a non-member?
I slipped because I traveled and went.
Oh, man. I know, embarrassing. This is public embarrassment. Raghu, I can't come back to GE. This is a terrible exhibition of leadership. Public flogging. Hold on to that, please. Free meeting for George.
Thank you.
Thank you. And George is a wonderful sport. For a free meeting, ha! Martha. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, let's combine these together. Okay, so this one is for the Dale Carnegie book. David Haggerty. There you go. This one is for the book from Nancy. And this is Marjorie Dervin. My gosh, this table is like, oh man. So John, what is your problem? I want to thank you for this. I want to thank you for this evening. Complete your assessments. Stand around, visit, buy another glass of wine, and I want to thank you for this evening. See you all in June.